I am primarily a children's book author. I have published over 100 books over the years, but I do have a master's and Master of Fine Arts in Creative Writing from Hamlin, and most of my grad school work did center on fiction for adults and also creative nonfiction. And I'll be doing another video, so if you're interested in that, keep an eye out. And I really enjoy, even though most of my published work has been for children, I really do enjoy writing for adults as well. And I'm hoping to get back to that someday. But so that's enough about me. Let's talk about you. You are here because you are interested in storytelling. You have something to say and you want to explore. So I think that's just great. Everybody is welcome here. We're going to cover a lot of material. I'll be throwing a lot of terms at you. Don't worry if you don't, understand everything or remember the terms right away. That's just totally natural. Hopefully there'll be something in here that you will relate to in regard to what you already have written or what you are hoping to write. And of course, you can always watch the video again. You can always also Google some of the terms that we'll be talking about. So I am going to share my PowerPoint here. And I'm going to make this just a little bigger so I'm not so tiny. And there we go. Move that there. All right. So we're going to start out with the basics, right? What is story? So there are three main elements that we need to have a story. We need setting. That seems kind of obvious, right? Things have to take place in a certain location. We need characters and we need things that happen. But you can have all of those elements and that's still not quite a story. We also need conflict. Conflict creates tension in a story. And then this tension is kind of the thread that pulls the reader along to the end when the conflict is resolved. So conflict can be internal and external. Internal is the psychological stuff, at war with ourselves, right? External is, that can be just any number of things, right? It can be nature, it can be culture, society, relationships, all sorts of things. Often the conflict in fiction is a combination of the two. So here is a quote from the Creative Writer's Handbook. The main questions a work of fiction must address: what does the character want and why? That is a key point. It's something for you to keep in mind as you are writing. That will, if you do that, then the conflict part will probably fall into place naturally. And I'm just going to show you. So this book here, I'm going to be pulling a few quotes from this throughout here. I taught Intro to Creative Writing at Hennepin Tech for a few semesters, and I adapted parts of this, of the PowerPoint that I used there for this. So, okay, now we're going to talk about setting. So, in simplest terms, setting is the time and place of your story. It's the total environment in which your characters live. And that sounds simple, but it actually can get kind of complex because you've got the big setting, right? Well, what country are you in? What city are you in? What neighborhood are you in? Or time period, are you prehistoric? Are you Middle Ages? Are you contemporary? And even right now, I'm sure there are differences in what people are writing about pre-pandemic and post-pandemic, right? There has been a change that has taken place. And so that would play into the setting as well, as far as time goes. And also, there can be more subtle variations with time, seasons, time of day, light has a big part to do with some stories. Um, Even like I'm just thinking of my daughter's room when she was growing up. It's like on different days it looked like a completely different place, right? Sometimes it was pretty neat, other times it was just an absolute disaster. And those kinds of things can play a role in setting. So, and I just have to point out, I like sharing some of my photos here. So here, this is a pig. I have friends who have a house pig, and that pig owns that sofa there, that couch. So, something like that could be a part of a setting, right? I keep thinking that's got to be a story, but I don't have one there quite yet. Okay. Um, and here's another quote that I really liked from that book. From a character's point of view, setting is not a set, but rather their home, a place in which all their senses operate. I think that is something that if you keep it in mind, it will help you make your characters real. If you think about what are they actually experiencing, pretend they're real. What are their senses telling them? Here, how the characters feel about and relate to the setting is often the background music of the work. Setting isn't established and forgotten. So when you're starting a piece, you're going to want to ground the reader so the reader knows basically where and when something is taking place. But after that, you're going to be doling it out, as your character lives. You're going to be changing the setting, changing the scenes from time to time. You might have big jumps in time as well. That's all. That's all cool. You can do pretty much anything. Characters. So characters or stories often originate from contemplating a character first. Um, some writers completely make up their characters. Others base their characters on people they know in real life, or they might put together a composite character based on two or more people. The writer's main concern is that the characters come alive on the page. And one thing to remember is that readers don't have to like the characters, but they do need to be interested in them. They have to care. If you're reading a story about someone that you just like, who cares? Then you're not going to be engaged in that story, and you probably won't finish it. And I just want to say, I personally have used all three of these, making up or real people or composite. And I think that basing characters on people, in real life can be pretty effective if you pick people that you don't know that well. It's like it can give you a starting point for details, but then you're not gonna, if you don't know them that well, nobody's gonna come back at you later and say, hey, was this character based on me? I don't like how I was portrayed, anything like that. um, you can play around with it. Like I said, you can do what you want. There are three main types of characters. The main character is the primary character whose story you are telling. Sometimes you might have more than one main character. Secondary characters are, the people who are important to the main characters, basically. They're necessary for understanding them and carrying out the plot. And then functionaries are characters who are just like filling a role. And I think you can maybe consider them part of the setting. So like for example, if a main character is, at a restaurant, um, there's going to be a server, right? You're not going to want to go into great detail about that, but that, you can have just enough details so that, that the reader gets a vivid mental image of what's going on. Um, okay. And here's something that you can do if you are trying to figure out how to develop your character. Write a character sketch. So the easiest way to begin is to just write a list of characteristics that make up your character. And even if you have a big long list of things, just keep in mind that your character might not be fully formed in your early drafts because it can take a while to get to really know someone, right? And as in real life, right? But eventually you might come to understand your characters so well that you'll know what they would think or do in any situation. Um, and as you put together your character sketch, I think it's useful to think in terms of three areas. We've got life facts, personality, and inner life. So life facts, basic things, name, age, physical characteristics, birthplace and family of origin. Where does the character live? What are the primary relationships? Does the character have a career or job? You know, whoops, I forgot my other parentheses there. Or maybe you're writing about a young person who is in school or an older person who's retired, you know, or somebody who's on disability and isn't working. You know, those are all, you know, what is that person doing with their time, basically. Personality, general demeanor. You know, is that person, you know, revved up all the time? Is the person kind of, you know, lazy? Is the person anxious, or really sweet and kind? Best and worst qualities, any idiosyncrasies or quirks. That can be fun, but uh, be careful not to go overboard with that, I think, because that kind of maybe stands out a little bit if you do too many quirks or have a quirk that's just like way out there. Talents and interests of the characters. Okay, inner life now, hopes and dreams, fears, thoughts and feelings. So all of that. If you have cover all of these, then you are likely to have a, you know, pretty comprehensive look at your character. So all that said, you will probably know a lot more about your character than you can put in your story, and that's okay. Uh, the creative process generates a lot of waste. We're always having more than we can actually use, and that's good. That's just part of the process. Just pick and choose the things that are most relevant for your story, and that might change over time as you write. So this is something to ask yourself as you're writing. What does your character care most about right now? So that kind of goes hand in hand with the conflict that I was talking about earlier. If you keep those things in mind, you'll be headed in the right direction, I think. And if you really like this process of making a character sketch, do an internet search for character sketch, and there are lots of prompts available. This is just like kind of the basic stuff here, but there are some questions that really get detailed and fun, and you might enjoy that. Okay. So you have your character. How do we tell in fiction what a character is like? How do we let the reader know? There are four ways that we can reveal character. One is what they look like, what they say, what they do, and what they think. I want to say just a little bit about what they look like. Um, that's something that you'll be kind of doling out, just like with setting, you know, it kind of changes throughout. What characters look like, that's going to change throughout too. I mean, you're going to have a little bit of description at the beginning, you know, so that the reader knows, you know, can create a mental image of this person. But the rest of it's going to depend on the situation, right? There might be, you know, somebody, you know, is depressed and hasn't showered for 4 days, you know, that person's going to look different than somebody who's just like, you know, really up and at 'em or something, right? So those kinds of things are going to fluctuate. What you're going to want to do is just keep the most telling details. And we're gonna look at some examples here pretty soon, but so the writer may provide this information through direct exposition, which is basically another way of just explaining, just putting it out there plainly, or by showing us in a scene. And we're going to be talking about that just, some more too. Okay, so this is, I have a couple of excerpts here from Olive Kitteridge by Elizabeth Strout. Just going to look at this to show what we know about character here and how. So Mousy, his wife said, sorry, I need to back up. So Olive is kind of an older woman. This is like maybe she's in her 70s and they're living, she's married to Henry and they are living in the Northeast somewhere. So Mousy, his wife said when he hired the new girl, looks just like a mouse. Denise Thibodeau had round cheeks and small eyes that peeped through her brow-framed glasses. But a nice mouse, Henry said, a cute one. No one's cute who can't stand up straight, Olive said. It was true that Denise's narrow shoulders sloped forward as though apologizing for something. She was 22, just out of the State University of Vermont. Okay, so here we have dialogue to start with, right? And so from this dialogue, we can tell that Olive is kind of cranky, right? And blunt. That is her nature. We know that Henry maybe likes Denise Thibodeau a little bit, or is just a more kindly person, right? We know through this just straight up exposition here that we know what this character looks like, right? She's not even in the scene, but we kind of know what she looks like there. It's just stated outright. And we know here too, this is another thing here. More exposition about the narrow shoulders, as though apologizing. And then we just know that she's 22, just out of the State University. So what we know what they look, we have some physical characteristics here. We have the dialogue. Yeah, that's what we're learning here. Now, if we go to this one, Olive walks to the closet, pulls open the door. The dresses there make her feel violent, though. She wants to snatch them down, twist the expensive dark fabric of these small dresses hanging pompously on wooden hangers. So there we have her doing something, right? That's an action. And we have her thoughts, her inner life. Those dresses, I don't know what's going on with those dresses, but she does not like them. And so that's getting pretty deep inside her inner psyche there. And see how few words both of these passages are. It doesn't take a lot of words to really create a vivid image for your reader, or to pass along a lot of knowledge to your reader. If you pick the right words, they will speak volumes. Okay, so now we're going to talk a little bit more about dialogue. So in Creative Writer's Handbook, there's a quote: what characters say to one another is a key way of dramatizing them, putting their needs and wants into action. So, dramatizing them makes me think of a play, and that's kind of what you're doing. You're putting on a show and moving. You're like the director, right? You're moving people around, telling them what to say, where to go, what to do, etc. What does dialogue do? So dialogue reveals character. We saw that in that earlier excerpt, right? Shows relationships between characters. It provides information the reader needs to know, and it moves the plot along. And ideally, you will have dialogue that will do one or more of these things. What you want to avoid is dialogue that doesn't do any of these things. Sometimes you have to have a little bit just for to make things seem real, but you're going to want to cut back on on that kind of dialogue. You know, the stuff that we say in real life, if you were to make a transcript of it, most of it would be pretty boring, and most of it would seem kind of incoherent. So we don't want to go to seem that realistic. We're just creating an impression. But so if you keep these things in mind, though, that your dialogue needs to do more than one thing, and the main thing, you know, always it should reveal character, um, then you will have an easier time of writing really effective dialogue. Okay, so dialogue tags are those words that tell us who is speaking, and they often indicate how the characters are speaking or what the characters are doing as they speak. So here we have, leave it, Olive commanded, standing up. Just leave it alone, Henry, for God's sake. So here we see that Olive is commanding, right? She's saying something in a way that's different than a different way of saying it, right? She's not whispering, she's not pleading, she's not asking, she's commanding. And she's also standing up, which kind of that energy of standing up kind of goes with the commanded there. Heading for the door, Henry Thibodeau said, "Say, we're going to have you and Olive for dinner soon." So this is kind of bland, right? But it's slice of life, but I'm using this as an example for this. Heading for the door, Henry Thibodeau said. Okay, so we have an action here, and then we just have the basic word said. Here, how dare you tell him what to do? You don't even pay enough attention to know what he's going through in social studies class. Olive shouted this at him while Christopher remained silent, a smirk on his face. So this is interesting because you see that you don't even have like a said here. You actually technically don't even have a dialogue tag, which is fine because you have this right next to the dialogue. So you know that she's the one saying it, but you don't need to have that actual tag. You can just have the action there. So another thing to keep in mind is that most of the time you're going to be using the word said to indicate that someone is speaking. That is just fine. Said is considered invisible. Readers aren't going to notice it unless you use it frequently when you don't need to. Here, so it says if it's clear who is speaking, you can skip them altogether. So don't hesitate. If the reader knows who is saying what, and the reader isn't going to, you know, pause and need to figure it out, you don't have to have a dialogue tag. You know, it's sometimes good to have like a variety, you know, where you have the, you know, a said, nothing at all, or an action. That can be really effective. So indirect discourse is a paraphrase of dialogue. You can use this technique when you need to convey information that would slow down your story. So, for example, you could say, she told him what happened that night, instead of having your character repeat information that the reader already knows. So that way the reader can stay focused on the responses of the characters. So here's just a quick example from the namesake here. At school, Ashok and Gogol are greeted by the secretary, Mrs. McNabb, who asks Ashok to fill out a registration form. Okay. It's not necessary to put this in dialogue. This is just like moving the scene along. So we're going to be having dialogue that's more meaningful a little bit later, but we don't need to have dialogue for everything. Okay, so plot is what happens in a story. I just have to point out. So I was visiting a friend last fall, and all of a sudden these nuns were walking by, and it was just kind of this cool visual thing, and it just made me think there's got to be there's a story there, right? What are they doing? That and the pig, right? Not to find a way to put those two together. Anyway, so I just thought I wanted to share that here in this screen. I'm sorry I made it on a loop, so it's going to drive you crazy, and I shouldn't have done that. I'm sorry, but okay. Back to plot. So plot isn't simply the order in which events happen. It's the order in which the events are revealed to the character and to the reader. So a quote here from Creative Writer's Handbook: plot is the shape we give to the story materials by selection, arrangement, and emphasis. Plot involves what parts of the story are told and shown, and when these parts are presented to the reader. And I think if you examine the plots of some of your favorite books or movies or television shows, you can spot that pretty readily. So much of the enjoyment, the tension in fiction comes from what basically who knows what and when, right? So that's something to keep in mind as well. So here are some plot terms. Exposition or introduction. So we're introduced to the characters, setting, etc. Exposition, I said before, it's just like explanation. Not all stories are going to start with just a bunch of explanation. Sometimes stories start in the middle of the action. That's called in medias res. And sometimes they're started, it's not maybe really right in the middle of the action, but you're in a scene right away, and you're not really, the narrator isn't just, setting it out there. So don't feel that you have to have, a few paragraphs of exposition. You can start it where you feel like you need to. Rising action. These are the events that present and develop the major conflict in the story. And there might be minor ones too. If it's a really short story, it's probably just one major conflict. But if you're writing a novel or, whether it's for a novel for adults or for young adults or for middle grade readers, even picture books, you might have more than one conflict going on. But there should for sure be one major one. The climax is the point of highest tension and drama in a story. Falling action, that's after the climax. That it wraps up the narrative, leads towards closure. Resolution is the very end of a story. Now, these are kind of standard terms, but personally, I don't know how useful they are. Like I already talked about this part of it. We know we for sure need rising action. We need that conflict. We need to have a climax, the point of highest tension. But often, falling action and resolution might happen almost simultaneously. And if you're writing a horror story or something with a cliffhanger, you're going to end right here. So it's good to have these terms in mind as you're writing, but you can shape your story in many ways. All right. So here are a couple of other plot terms that I think are I find these more useful maybe than the other ones. Point of attack. This is the first forward moving scene that you choose to show the reader. And you may need to write a few drafts before you know the best place to start a piece. I'm sure you've had that experience where you've started reading a book, whether it's a picture book or a novel, or maybe even a memoir or something like that, some nonfiction, and you just can't get into it. It's just doesn't pull you in right away and you kind of give up on it. That's because the writer probably didn't choose the best point of attack. You want something that is going to engage the reader. You don't want to waste anyone's time with things that don't have that thread, that tension that's going to like pull you through. Or if not tension, at least the sense of interest, what's going to happen next. And then premise is closely related to point of attack. Premise is the combination of character, setting, and situation at the point of attack. And this is my cat attacking his fun little mouse. And I just have to say, I think it's really sweet that he has a lot of catnip mice, but his favorite one is this white one with the little red hat on. So he's always attacking that guy. Okay, so a couple of other things related to plot, flashbacks and foreshadowing. If you've watched movies or TV, you know what this is about, right? Flashback is a remembered scene that interrupts the ongoing action. It should be related to the plot or the character's growth, maybe show an important memory that is involved in the story in some way. Foreshadowing is when the reader gives hints of future events. It creates tension and it allows the reader to more readily accept the events in the story. You want to use these somewhat sparingly because then they will be put to better effect. A little bit of these, I think, goes a long way. Okay, so this was like a long quote in this book, and I broke it up because I think it's pretty useful. So writers work out plots in many ways. Some find out what will happen by writing along until the direction reveals itself almost magically. Then they go back and make it all connect. So these people just like plunge in. They don't know ahead of time what they're doing. They're just gonna see what happens. And that's fine. It's a perfectly valid way to start. But it's key here. Then they go back and make it all connect. So you're always going to have to, the things that happen at the end might impact what might mean that you need to change things that happen at the beginning. Some construct elaborate outlines of each scene and transition and will not begin writing until they know every part of their story. So just the opposite, right? Some start with characters and then invent situations and plots for them to act in. Some start with plots and invent characters. Some start with abstract ideas and invent everything else to express those ideas. And the starting places, if not infinite, are various, and you will find a way to work that is most congenial and productive for you. So again, there's no one right way to approach plot. You might want to experiment. If you're somebody who really likes to outline things, that's like your nature to do that. It might be kind of fun for you to make yourself write a short piece where you're just kind of winging it, and then, then go back. But I thought there was something else I was going to say here, but it's gone. Sorry. All right. We're going to move on to point of view. So another huge concept in fiction. So point of view, or POV, is the vantage point from which a story is told, the narrator's position. Who is doing the telling? So if we look at this little picture of a dinosaur by a tree or monster, whatever he is, took in my neighborhood a while back, uh, you know, the monster, the dinosaur would have one point of view, one perspective, and each of these little gnomes here would be able to tell a different story too, right? Um, so it's a fun thing to think about. When you have a story in mind, you might want to really give some conscious thought to who is the best person to be telling this story, or through whose eyes are we seeing this story. And then also going along with point of view, these are like the point of view techniques, I guess. First person, third person, objective, limited, or omniscient, and second person. And we're going to talk about those now. So first person point of view, the narrator is one of the characters in the story. So usually a participant, but maybe a witness. The reader can only know what that narrator reveals. And that narrator can't get into anybody else's head, right? Nobody else's thoughts. That narrator can only report what that narrator personally experiences. And here is an example from the young adult novel, The Hate You Give by Angie Thomas. People glance over at me with that, who is this chick standing against the wall by herself like an idiot? Look, I slip my hands into my pockets. As long as I play it cool and keep to myself, I should be fine. So here you see, we see her doing things. I slip my hands into my pockets, but we also get into her head. We know what she is thinking. Third person point of view, this narrator looks as an onlooker or speaks as an onlooker or reporter rather than as a participant. He, she are the pronouns that you would use there, but you can't really have third person point of view just on its own. You have to have either third person limited omniscient, third person fully omniscient, or third person objective. So limited omniscient, that narrator can access the mind of one character, usually the main one. So one person is, those are the, we know thoughts, right? But only that person's thoughts. So that person, that person's mind is like, that's the camera. That person is holding the camera. Fully omniscient can access the minds of all the characters and can describe action in any number of places and throughout time. Fully omniscient narrator is like God, sees all, knows all powerful, right? And objective is just the opposite of the fully omniscient. Objective has no access to the minds of any of the characters. So the entire story, we don't know any thoughts. All we have is, what somebody can observe, like a play, right? Now, I would say this is pretty rare. That it's kind of tricky to pull something like that off, and you don't see that very often. Fully omniscient, it used to be more. I mean, older literature was probably more fully omniscient, and we're going to look at some examples too. But it can be really effective. But I think that these days it seems like the point of view that's most commonly seen, it's usually either first person or limited omniscient. Now, a little bit about this though, the limited omniscient, you can switch between, like a chapter might be from one person's point of view, and then another chapter might be from another character's point of view, and you might even have multiple points of view that way. But the point is that at one time, you're only going to be in the mind of one character. So third person limited point of view. Jonas stood for a moment beside his bike, startled. It had happened again, the thing that he thought of now as seeing beyond. This time it had been Fiona who had undergone that fleeting, indescribable change. As he looked up and toward her going through the door, it happened. She changed. Actually, Jonas thought, trying to recreate it in his mind, it wasn't Fiona in her entirety. It seemed to be just her hair, and just for that flickering instant. So we've got third person, right? We've got Jonas, his, his, he, um, and we see things through his eyes, and then we also know his thoughts as well. And that's from The Giver by Lois Lowry. So third person omniscient. This is an example from Little Women. When the first bitterness was over, the family accepted the inevitable and tried to bear it cheerfully, helping one another by the increased affection which comes to bind households tenderly together in times of trouble. They put away their grief, and each did his or her part toward making that last year a happy one. So that narrator sees the big picture, sees everything. Second person point of view, the narrator tells the story using the word you. This is pretty rare. You don't see this very often at all. It can be kind of gimmicky, I think. But you're the boss of your work. If you want to do it, you can do it. So here's an example. I wasn't able to find a short story or a novel that used second person, but I have this from the essay 15 by Bernice McFadden. Your mother came to visit you every weekend. She came to visit you as if you were away at summer camp. The two of you never once talked about what she had done or why she had done it. Till that day and since, you two have never discussed it. It was like the cashmere sweaters all over again. So in a way, I feel like using the second person, it's kind of like using first person. You can do all the things you would with first person, except you're using you. And maybe the idea is that it's going to make it seem more immediate to the reader, make the reader maybe imagine themselves in that situation. So you can write in whatever point of view comes naturally to you. And in the course of revision, you can experiment, you can change the point of view. Main thing is that you are consistent throughout your story. And I've already kind of alluded to that, with the limited omniscient, you could switch chapters, but like if you have in one piece, or in one scene or something like that, and you've got throughout the whole story you've been writing just through one person's eyes, right, one person's perspective, and then all of a sudden the thoughts of a different character, that kind of thing is jarring, and you're going to want to kind of keep your eye out for that. I think the most helpful thing to do is to just, when you are writing, to really put yourself in the camera, right? Whatever your point of view is, whichever character, just have that perspective instead of just kind of looking at everything, like this. Just look through that person's eyes. That's all I can say. Okay, verisimilitude. This is the appearance of being true or real. So even if you are writing a complete fantasy, you still have to create the illusion that the world that you are presenting actually exists. So to maintain that verisimilitude, this is the most important thing. Include concrete details about the setting. So concrete means, it has a presence in the physical world. So you're going to want things that are specific and sensory, right? Things that, you can see, taste, touch, smell, feel. Those are things that if you get them together in a cohesive whole, then the reader will be able to visualize what your world. Another thing is to be sure your characters are behaving consistently from scene to scene. If they're not, the reader should know why they aren't, even if the other characters don't know. Another thing is, don't use plot twists just to get out of a dead end. It's tempting. It's very tempting sometimes to do that. But if you feel like you need to resort to something like that, chances are something earlier in your piece isn't fully developed. Events need to be connected in a logical way. You can still have surprises, but nothing too shocking or out there, or something that just doesn't seem to connect with everything else that you have already established in your story. So I talked about including those details for world building, right? But don't get bogged down in the details. Just make sure that the ones you do include are effective. You're trying to just create an impression of reality. And I sometimes think of, I wasn't able to find an image. I wanted to share an image of this with you guys, but on Facebook a few years ago, I remember there was this thing, post that was making the rounds. There was a paragraph and words were missing. Entire words were missing. Or maybe it was, yeah, I think it was entire words were missing, or letters within words. And a person could still read it, and it wasn't that hard. And our brains autofill, right? We see something and we fill in the blanks. And so that's what you're doing here in fiction. You're filling in the blanks, but you want to make sure that the stuff that you have there is like solid, that the reader will be able to project their own mental imagery, their own thoughts there, and not be, too off the mark. It can be really frustrating sometimes if you have a certain image in your mind, and then all of a sudden you realize the writer said that, there's something in the text that says, oh, that's not right. I wasn't picturing this person right, or this event, or this whatever scene or setting right. So that's what you want to keep an eye out for. You want to keep the reader on track. So one standard bit of advice for writers is to show, don't tell. Telling would be, Abigail was stunned by the news. Showing would be, what did you say? Abigail asked, her voice trembling. So in her dialogue and in what she's doing, we can tell that she is stunned. Here's another example. This is from Olive Kitteridge. This one I just made up. Olive thinks the house looks shabby. So that's telling. This one has a little of both, right? Olive, having never been inside before, thinks the place looks tired. It's not just because some tiles are missing from the floor by the stove, or that part of the counter is bubbled up along the edge. The place simply has an air of exhaustion. So here we have her, this is just fact, right? This is just very similar to this, right? It's just using tired instead of shabby. But here we have a concrete detail, right? Something specific. Tiles missing from the floor by the stove, a counter bubbling up. And then again, we're repeating this idea. So that really kind of drives it home, right? And I also want to point out here, we have tiles missing from the floor by the stove. That gives us a mental image. In this particular case, because this isn't, a hugely important detail in the story, we don't need to know the color or the design of any of this stuff. This is enough. The counter bubbling up along the edge, that's enough. That's what we need. So, and this is kind of goes along with what we just talked about, scene and summary. To keep the reader's attention, you're going to want to vary the pace of your story. So if you have one scene after another without a break, then readers might lose track of the plot, or they might have trouble connecting with the characters. Because if you don't ever, know any of the thoughts or impressions, reflections of the character, you maybe don't care about them quite so much. You're not quite as connected. So likewise, if you have lots of exposition or summary without any scenes, then the reader might get impatient or bored. And I think that a useful way to look at this is like real time versus compressed time. Those are the things you're going to want to vary in your fiction. So real time, another example from Olive Kitteridge. Olive is at a resting, there's a social gathering going on, and she's away from people, resting on a bed, and she's got like a mole with hair coming out of it, and that's what the little girl is commenting on. So, okay, what's that on your chin? Olive sees that the little girl has been chewing on a ribbon from her dress. Crumbs, Olive says. From little girls I've eaten up. Now go away before I eat you too. She makes her eyes big. The girl steps back slightly, holding the door jamb. You're making that up, she finally says, but she turns and disappears. About time, Olive murmurs. So you see, this is just, as it happens, the sense of time is realistic. Here we have compressed time. But the day passed okay, and then another day passed. She took the dog to the park earlier so as to avoid Sean. And while everything remained strange, like a foreign country, she could not let go of a certain happiness within her. She was with her son. At times he was talkative, and at times he was silent, and he was most familiar to her then. So here we have kind of a compression, right? We've got a statement that applies to a number of days. And that's effective too, right? You wouldn't want to just, have a big description of every day. That would get pretty tedious, right? So this is, and I know some of this stuff seems pretty obvious, but it's useful, I think, to bring it out, bring it to your attention, bring it to your consciousness so that you will look for these kinds of things in your writing. So some additional tips here. Don't feel you need to be clever or tricky to get the reader's attention. Who, where, and when need to be established in almost every piece of fiction, and little is ever gained by hiding this material from the reader. Making puzzles out of basic information, a novice's idea of creating mystery, more often loses the reader altogether. So, yeah, it's frustrating to read a story when you don't really know what's going on. You know something is missing, and you're trying to figure it out, but there had better be a really good payoff, right? If you're gonna, if you stick with it to the end, and it's, the payoff isn't that great, you're gonna feel like maybe you wasted your time, that wasn't the best thing for you to read. you probably don't, and I think I already alluded to this, you don't need to include everything you know about the characters or about the story. However much you tell the reader about the background, you will know 10 times more than you can tell. Your job is to anticipate the reader's needs as the story unfolds and to offer the right information and no more in the right place. You've noticed that I have referred throughout this video here to the reader. And sometimes when we're writing, we forget the reader, but it's important to always keep the reader in mind. What does the reader know? And you know, you might have a lot more stuff in your head. Sometimes you think that it's on the page, but it's not, and then the reader will get confused. Or sometimes you say absolutely everything on the page, and the reader just doesn't need to know all of that stuff. Connections count. You can't let down your guard and cruise for a while, because what is said on page 20 had to connect with page 6 and both with page 23. You need to constantly anticipate, recognize, and solve the problem during your revision. And here I underlined during your revision because that is crucial. I don't want you to feel like hesitant to even start writing because you've all to keep all this stuff in your head, you know. No, you don't have to keep all this stuff in your head. It's not possible to keep all this stuff in your head at the same time. You just start wherever you want to start, and it will come to you what your piece is supposed to be, and you will shape it. Those early drafts are like forming the clay, you know, that you're going to sculpt, basically. The connecting thing here, I wrote a young adult novel for my thesis at Hamlin, and I sure found this to be true. Those connections in the revision process, it was kind of fun to see, you know, what to play up those connections. I might not have even seen those connections. I might not have intended those connections at first, but once I was, you know, well into it, I recognized them, I saw them, and then I could, you know, enhance them. Getting started, start anywhere. I've already said that. My personal process is I kind of start out in sketch form. I mean, my first starting a new project, it's like it's not coherent. You know, I'll have just little bits and pieces here and there. I'll have sometimes, you know, if I don't think of a word, you know, or an idea, but I want to keep going, I'll just put X's in there and I'll come back to it later. It's kind of it's a mess, but that's okay. If you find yourself scared of the blank page, which is pretty normal, try thinking of your first draft as a play draft. You know, you're just keeping it loose. You're just playing around with your ideas. That's all you have to do. And then don't worry also about how many drafts that it takes to get it right. That's part of the creative process. A lot of the time we just don't know where we're going to go until we get there. And I mean that came up over and over again. Like when I was going to grad school, that's how it works a lot of the time. And that's what makes writing and fiction in particular, that's what makes it fun and exciting, you know. Your piece will take on a life of its own. Your characters will seem to come alive for you, and it's a great feeling. It's very satisfying. It's one of the reasons to write, is to experience that. Here's a quote by Michael Crichton. Books aren't written, they're rewritten, including your own. It is one of the hardest things to accept, especially when the seventh rewrite hasn't quite done it. Yeah. I mean, as much as I do, fully embrace the revision process, as I just said, but it's sometimes, yes, it can be frustrating if things aren't coming together the way that you want them to. But sometimes when that happens, it takes me to the next point here, to set your work aside for a few days or weeks or even longer. I think the longer the piece that you write, the more time you need in between. When you get back to it, you'll be better able to spot the changes that need to be made. Um, I think of, well, I have an example. I have a picture book manuscript that I wrote, probably almost 20 years ago. And I really liked it, but there was a one part in it that I just couldn't get. It just wasn't working and I didn't know how to fix it. So periodically I would, take it out, play with it, just wasn't getting it. And then a few years ago, it finally hit me what I needed to do to fix it. And now I'm really happy with that manuscript, and I am going to try to um, send that out and hopefully get that published someday. Um, Another tip: to share your work with a few trusted readers. Join a writing workshop if you can. But the thing that's going to make that most helpful is to tell your readers about your specific concerns so that they know what to look for. Otherwise, you might get readers who just say, "Oh, that's great, I loved it," and they love everything, right? And then that might not be very useful to you. Or you might get people who are um, excessively critical about things that you are perfectly fine with. And that's another thing to keep in mind too. This is all very subjective. You're the boss of your work. Uh, what I think is useful is um, to like depersonalize it. And if people give you feedback, it's not about you, it's about the work. So if somebody tells you something that makes your work better, embrace it, right? If somebody tells you something that you don't agree with, you don't think that's going to help your piece, forget it. You don't have to do that. You don't have to follow everybody's advice if you don't think it's going to help your work. And the other thing is to keep writing. So it's, as with any other skill, the more you do it, the better you get. And, some of your early pieces might not be that great. Who cares? Everybody starts out that way, right? But the thing is that they teach you, whenever you sit down to write, whatever it is, the writing itself is going to teach you, and you can apply what you learn, to your next work or the work after that or the work after that. So this is pretty key to keep writing. And, it's helpful to be able to write every day or at least consistently. In real life, that might not happen. I know it doesn't always happen for me. I'm kind of terrible at that. I go through long periods where I don't write at all. And yet I still feel like, well, I am a writer, because writing isn't just about writing. It's also about kind of a way of looking at the world. And you can have that way of looking at the world even when you're not actively writing. But don't let that be an excuse for too long. At some point, you still want to get out that keyboard, get out that pencil, and do your thing. Okay, so I have a couple of exercises I want to suggest, just in case you want to do them. I think this is really, really useful, both of these tips here. So select a passage of writing that you enjoy and that you think is well written. Copy it by hand, multiple times even. Concentrate on every word as if you were writing the passage yourself and not simply copying it. By hand is a good idea. Research shows that when our hands are involved, there's more brain activity when we write by hand versus when we use a keyboard. But if you're not used to writing by hand and you need to use the keyboard, that's fine too. I mean, it's certainly still going to be beneficial. So that simple act is going to help you internalize the rhythms and structures of good writing. Plus, it will also give you the benefit of, like, if you're a little shaky on like how to use, where do commas go with dialogue tags, or how do you use a dash or things like that, some of the punctuation stuff. This is going to be great for that as well. It's an easy, low stress way to improve your writing. So I highly recommend this. Also, this is another thing you can do is to, maybe take that same passage or a different one, study it. What is the writer doing? How is the writer accomplishing it? Make a note of transitions, the word choices, any dialogue. Articulate to yourself why you like that passage and how the writer accomplishes their goals. And that's one other thing about writing that is really, really cool. It is, anybody can do it. You do not need a master's degree. You do not need a college degree. You don't even need, a high school diploma. Anybody can write, because how to learn how to write is all around us, right? There are books everywhere. There are good books everywhere. And, if you study them and if you practice, you can write really well. Another exercise to explore point of view. You can take one of your own passages or maybe a passage from a book you're reading. How would one of the other characters in the piece view what happens? What details would they notice? How would they feel? And rewrite that passage from that character's point of view. You might want to do this, like if you have a piece and you're just wondering if you should switch, just take a couple of paragraphs and give it a try to see. Writing prompts. So if you're trying to make writing a practice, this might be, but you don't necessarily have a particular piece that you want to work on at the moment, a writing prompt can be great for that. So you can make up your own. Here are some links here that have a whole bunch of cool prompts, or just Google, do an internet search for writing prompts, and you'll find, just a whole lot of them out there. In closing quote here, we're almost done. Thanks for staying with me here. In fiction, you can travel anywhere you want, so long as you can convince your reader to take the trip with you. So if you can think it, you can write it, and you can share it. That's kind of what it's about here. Okay, so I just want to say a couple more things. If you are interested in learning more about planting people, growing justice, this is the website. They have writing competitions on a regular basis for adults and for students. Students, I believe 3rd through 12th grade. So keep an eye on the website for opportunities to enter contests. And then also here is my website if you want to know more about me and my work. And also, if you have any questions for me, you can email me through my website, and that would be perfectly fine. So, all right. All right. So thank you so much for joining me, for putting up with me, making these video things. It's like, that's not really my a dominant skill set for me, but I hope you found this useful, and I hope that you will keep writing. So thanks. Bye.